Hello and welcome to another episode of the EduFuturist podcast. It is wonderful to be here in the studio with my pal, Mr. Hope, as always. He's got a bit of a sore throat, a bit of a cough, so we'll forgive him if he has to unmute himself, and he's feeling a bit sorry for himself. He's been a big brave boy though, aren't you, Steve? Man flu is deadly.
I'm just lucky to be here, everybody. I battled through it and made the effort. But yeah, it's just one of those lingering cough things that just sounds worse than what it is, badly, but sounds even worse on a podcast to be coughing down a mic. So I am here. I'll try and ask as many questions and dive into as much as I can. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah,
despite it raining.
Yeah, despite the rain, despite the autumn of where we are. And we are massively honoured, privileged, pleased to be joined by Martin Griffin on the podcast today. Martin is somebody, and I was saying just before we went on air, when I used to be head of sixth form, I left there in 2017. I think I worked it out at the other day. Left there in 2017, and just before that, maybe 2018 it was. I can't remember. The years blur into one, right? And I read a book that Martin had co-authored with Steve Oakes, similar to the one that we're going to talk about in this podcast today, which kind of revolutionised the way that we ran our sixth form and the mindset and helping young people to develop a mindset. So very much looking forward to this one. And worked in Manchester, right? So that's always a good thing. I tell Steve on a regular basis that Manchester is the best city in the north. He tells me that Leeds is. He's lying. I'm closer to Manchester. I'm not living in Manchester, but I'm closer to Manchester than I am to Leeds. So we're there. Martin, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Steve, for inviting me along. Real pleasure to be here. I wanted to point out, actually, for those of you who are listening and not watching, that Ben's wearing I think that's a Blackburn Rovers football shirt you're recording in at the moment, isn't it? Is that correct?
It is. This is like a fan shirt. So it's Ruby Tuesdays are a local band who have created like a fan shirt. So it's a version of a Blackburn shirt, but yet it is a Blackburn shirt. I am a Blackburn fan. Season ticket holder.
Yeah, my name's Martin Griffin. I've been a teacher for 20-something years now, and a bit like Ben, I was a head of sixth form, appointed as head of sixth, I think, if memory serves, 2009. And I'd only worked in big sixth form colleges up to that point. The first 12, 15 years of my teaching career in big FE and sixth form colleges in the northwest of England. And it was my first role, externally appointed as a head of sixth form in an 11 to 18 comprehensive school in North Manchester. And that's where my interest really became piqued with, okay, so what are 16 to 18-year-old students like? What makes certain ones more successful than others? I was watching students with equally impressive GCSE credentials kind of topping out or hitting some sort of ceiling in some cases, and in other cases seeming to kick on, to break through, to perform particularly well. And I was curious as to why this was happening. This kind of challenge to the past equals future narrative, the kind of lie of linearity that if you do well at this stage and this stage, you're almost fated to perform equally as well at the subsequent stages. And it was very interesting to see that not happening, and then trying to untangle that knot, figure out, okay, so why are some students more successful at this level than others, if it's not to do with their kind of cognitive or academic credentials, characteristics, circumstances. What else could it be? So that's where the work began. And that led to the first book, The A-Level Mindset, in 2016. I think the GCSE Mindset followed a year later in 2017. So I think they were the books you were referring to, Ben, weren't you, when you in your introduction?
Yes, they are. They are the ones that. So I read the A-Level Mindset, and then the GCSE Mindset, and we got that. I think the GCSE Mindset was just as I was leaving. So, but I know that they ran with it in Accrington. Yeah. And so in those books, like you obviously got an experience of being in that role as head of sixth form, and there's a conversation there. A lot of the mindset. A lot of the work there in those books was about obviously that phrase mindset, and we are part of that space that have been privileged to think around Carol Dweck's conversations around growth mindsets and about how we can set our mind at something and how we can get young people to develop a mindset. I wonder if you could maybe outline what's meant by the mindset, and then we'll get into conversation about VESPA as a concept.
Yeah, that's right. I was really interested in the kind of psycho-emotional component of learning, of the fact that it's inherently quite challenging to move through, let's say at Key Stage 4, you're moving through 8 to 10 really quite complex courses, and you're spinning all of those plates at once. There's a significant non-cognitive component to success. It's not just a case of, well, there's nothing here that's too challenging, so if we can do it 10 times, you'll be absolutely fine. There is, of course, coming along with that, issues around self-confidence or levels of efficacy or engagement or psychological enrollment or clarity of ambition. All of these things became evident when I studied alongside my co-writer, Steve Oakes, the students who seemed to be thriving in these circumstances. They had a set of kind of psychological characteristics that became behaviors. This, I think, is the crucial thing, that a lot of the research focuses in on an abstract construct or characteristic. So you might read a paper like Dweck's, for example, that talks about a frame of mind, a mindset. And then you read other papers that talk about perhaps commitment, or they say students with a higher degree of efficacy do well, or students who are conscientious do well. And often as teachers, that's quite difficult. You're left with this vague idea of a characteristic that we want. And sometimes we then simply urge our students to be more this. Okay, so you find yourself with young people saying, can you demonstrate a little bit more resilience, or we'd like to see a bit more ambition from you, or what you really need to do is knuckle down. And what we need to do, I think, is turn characteristics into behaviors. What does resilience, for example, look like on a day-to-day basis, so that we can democratize access to that characteristic by turning it into something that students can replicate? That particularly interested me. If we know, for example, that high effort students tend to outperform students whose levels of proactivity and effort are lower, what does that mean when we sit down with a student whose level of effort isn't where it needs to be? We can't simply say, you need to work harder. I think we need to turn that concept into a set of replicable behaviors. Here's what high effort students do day in, day out, in class, outside of class, as they're organizing their week. So that's at the heart of what I'm trying to achieve, taking these kind of abstract constructs and turning them into replicable behaviors.
And just on that, in terms of resilience and some of those key phrases that you, in a world where often, so let's take A levels as an example, that if a student starts post GCSE, so their journey post GCSE, and they've been told in certain regards, let's say that they have failed, how do you build resilience when actually you have endpoints that are around people being told that they're a failure? How do you build that as an educator? How do we build that as a system to actually focus on building resilience and focus on progress rather than just the passing, I guess? How would you do with that? And what examples have you seen that you can start to then think about, whether it's something that's happened, but I'm just thinking about the best way to GCSE to A level is where, and I know that's probably, I spent a lot of time in vocational education in FE, where maths is a particular subject as an example, and English, the results there, and actually whether they'll ever go on to get something. What does that look like in regards to developing and nurturing and building that resilience in those young people as a fresh start?
It's a really good point, Steve, really is. And I think here's just what, if I could just take one element of that. I think what often happens is that students are used to a culture which rewards product over process. Okay, so they might have come through a culture that rewards students who achieve certain outcomes. Your attendance has been 100% your mum, you get a letter home to your mum and dad. You've got exceptional GCSE grades. We're going to celebrate that. There's going to be a certificate evening. What behaviour change takes is that gritty, day-to-day building of fresh habits. So an interesting way of thinking about students who have in inverted commas failed up to this point is that we might reward behaviour changes step by step. And that means we're looking for different things when we're supporting and celebrating student progress. I'll give one example. If we, and I've done this with groups of students before, if we say to them, we're going to reward everybody over the next month in the run up to October half term, everybody we think who has put in a high level of effort, then that's a reward that is open to every single student in the classroom. These moments of fresh start are really, really important. And so when we track and monitor students, it's really important, isn't it, that we're always using fresh start points so that we haven't got this historical data which curses them to underperformance forever. So we've got these points of fresh start over and over again. And then we've got the reward of process as well as product. In other words, you've engaged in attempting to change your study behaviours, and we're exceptionally proud of that. That's a difficult road to travel, isn't it? And often we've found that teachers, I suppose, their observations of students tend to lag behind the reality. So when a student changes, it could be 2 to 3 weeks before a member of staff dealing with the hundreds of students that they do notices this change in behaviour. So I think by focusing on process, not product, we've changed the lens a little bit, and we work out ways in which we can celebrate small steps forward instead of creating a circumstance in which the student sees this is another interminable year that is going to end inevitably in failure like it did last year.
And that's them little micro wins, or those little marginal gains, as for use another analogy, the little tweaks that they're acknowledging that there is a movement in the right direction. There's something in it. Like, I think about my 13-year-old, her bedroom is like most teenagers' bedrooms. And then we get to a point where we go, come on. And then the other day, she tidied it. And what tends to happen with most teenagers' bedroom, they spend hours and hours tidying it. And then 10 minutes later, you go back in, you go, how's that happened? You've just spent ages tidying it. And I saw something the other day, which sounds like really stupid, but I realised it was a win, right? Which was, she'd hung her uniform up when she came in. She'd made a decision, because we've been talking to her about, like, why would you just leave it there? Just the win of putting that little... So the acknowledgement of that little win has meant for the last... And I don't want to jinx it, so I'm going to touch the wood. She's like, she started putting a uniform away, and she then started doing that. It's even things like habit stacking off the back of it. Then she's getting her homework out and putting her homework. She doesn't always do it, because sometimes she's got activities or whatever else. But she gets her home. Like them stacking of things, and all the evidence, obviously, from Atomic Habits and others talk about stacking of habits. What I loved when I sometimes when I read books, I skim them to try and find things that I want to find. Other times I read them cover to cover. This one I decided to make sure that I was reading the introduction, because I had an understanding already about what VESPA is as a concept, and I was very excited to hear about new ways to engage with young people to develop these new activities. I love that in the introduction where it talks about jigsaw pieces. I wonder if you could, like, maybe just... Because I think that's really pertinent at every level of education, and actually us as humans growing and learning and living. Maybe just talk about that analogy, because I think it's worthwhile as a ramp into considering the mindset.
Okay, yeah. So, well, first of all, thanks for that, Ben. I appreciate it. Let's dive in and think about learning as assembling a jigsaw. And let's say there's 100 pieces to this course. We know there's 100 pieces because we teach the course, we've read the syllabus, we've designed the course, we've sequenced its delivery, and we know the content entirely. The student doesn't know there's 100 pieces. So first of all, they're going to construct a jigsaw, and they don't know how big it is. They're not going to start with the edges necessarily. We might start in a bit that we're particularly interested in, or one that we think is foundational. So they begin assembling 3 or 4 pieces after the first week. Everything is neat and tidy because they're bang on top of it and it's September, so all their pieces are neatly assembled. A week later, we've done 4 or 5 more pieces, but everyone else is building jigsaws as well. So you're taking 20 jigsaw pieces home with you every day, and you've got to make sure they fit the right jigsaws. Then, shock horror, you discover that you've lost a few pieces on the way home, or you're ill and you minus a piece, and now the new piece doesn't make sense or won't fit. Then, and this gets worse, you look back at your old pieces and find the picture on them is fading because you can't accurately remember what that piece represented. So I suppose what I was trying to say through this metaphor has been extended beyond its ability to express what I'm trying to anymore, but you get the picture, pun intended. What we're looking at here is a complex process of assembling a schema. And often as teachers, we think this is super clear. And so we'll often say to classes, come on, year 10, you should know this. We did this 2 weeks ago. We did this in September. And to the student, it's another piece in a complicated series of jigsaws that they're constructing. What I was trying to emphasize, I think, is therefore the importance of the kind of psychological and behavioral component of education. If you're going to be successful putting together 10 100-piece jigsaws at once, or if you want to talk about A-levels, 3 1,000-piece jigsaws at once, first of all, you do have to have this clear sense of this is difficult. Why am I doing it? What am I trying to achieve? There has to be a kind of commitment component. It's raining outside. I don't want to go and get my pieces today. I've got enough already to figure out roughly what this picture is. There's an organizational component. I've piled up all my pieces from the week on my desk, and now I don't know where they all fit, and I'm just going to have to figure it out. There's a practice component because the damn pieces keep bleaching gradually over time until we can't even remember the picture on them. And of course, there's an attitudinal component. We have to stay optimistic. We've got to figure out that I'm in control. The locus of control is with me. I am capable of doing this. This is going to end. It's going to be important to me for the following reasons. So I'm glad you've pointed it out. I do use it sometimes to remind myself of this kind of significant psychological component to learning that I think as an individual deliverer of jigsaws, which we are, we often think, well, it's pretty straightforward from my perspective. I've just given them the 100 pieces. They should be in the clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we do. Like, I've been an A-level religious studies teacher. I know it back to front. I understand how Kant developed from Aquinas and how Aristotle's ideas were. Like, I understand them links and them covers, but brand new to everybody else, right? And like you said, juggling a million different other. Well, I say a lot of other jigsaws at the same time. So you went there with VESPA then. So VESPA obviously stands for vision, effort, systems, practice, attitude. And actually, you when you were saying right at the beginning of the introduction, you were talking about the evidence that you've seen and built up over time of the students that do well. Yeah. And who succeed, whatever success looks like. Success is a process, not just a product as well, right? There tends to be a correlation between some of these actions that they do or mindsets that they have that makes them do that. So obviously we could. It might just be worth just diving into some ideas that you think would be relevant for our listeners, that are things that you can think that we could develop with young people to help them develop their own sense of intrinsic motivation. Because I think ultimately underneath all this is, yes, getting a grade is a motivation. Yes, going to university or getting into an A-level course is a motivation. Yes, wanting to please a teacher is a motivation and please parents. But how do we build that in themselves? Sometimes that has got to be systemic, right? And it's got to be some like tangible things that they do.
Absolutely. Let's pick out a few. I think there's a couple of things to pick out about vision, motivation, engagement, psychological enrollment. I think one of the first is that students need to be able to engage in episodic future thinking, the ability to see into the future, okay, and say to themselves, once this happens, I'm going to feel the following ways. It's going to be important to me because results day will feel like this. The following doors will open. I will be given these opportunities. The campuses of the schools or colleges I want to study at look like this. And when motivated students are analysed, or we sit down with students who seem to be particularly engaged or committed to their education, they've often got this ability to episodic future think. I want to be at Newcastle University, sir, because the campus is like a vivid, visual, exciting thing in my head. I have a cognitive map of future me, and I can travel there and use that to motivate myself. When we interview students who are disengaged, they often have very limited cognitive maps of what the future might look like. What is a sixth form college? I don't know. I've never been to one. I haven't walked around the campus. I haven't spoken to a student who studies that way. Sometimes when we look around school corridors and look at what is celebrated and championed, we see the grades. We might see smart photos of smiling students with the grades next to their faces, or we might see the classic 6 kids in a line jump up and down with their certificates. But that doesn't give us a vivid visual sense of what their life becomes as a result of that success. So part of engagement and vision and motivation is having these vivid cognitive maps which create the ability to think episodically and vividly about the future. So that's one element of it, and that's on us as schools and colleges to create kind of information, advice and guidance which is vivid and exciting and magnetic. But also students need to begin to figure out who they are and what they value. So what we've found speaking to the most motivated students is that they're beginning to work out what they stand for, what's important to them. And there's a terrific study that I mentioned in the book called Divers and Thrivers, University of Toronto, 2016. They found that the high-performing students had purpose and process in mind with education. They had a strong sense of process. So they would set process goals. I'm here to learn skills. I'm here to build relationships. I'm going to have good friendships. I'm going to master the following material. And then they also had purpose goals. I'm doing this because I see this problem in the world around me. I want to contribute in this way. And often underperforming students had outcome goals or status goals. They would set goals like, I'm going to be rich, or I'm going to be famous or wealthy, or graduates earn more money. That's why I'm studying this course. So there's 2 components there that I think are really important. First, we can teach students to set purpose and process goals that are much more likely to engage them. But that means we have to give them an opportunity to explore who they are and what they stand for. A lot of my work frameworks those kind of behaviors. And then there's this idea of having a vivid sense of what the future looks like. We've got a number of activities that encourage students to do that. And then I would point out one other thing when it comes to goals and motivation. A lot of goal theory looks at the idea of approach goals or avoidance goals. And this is at the forefront of my mind at the moment because I've been working with a group of students whose goals are avoidance goals. Avoidance goals do exactly what they say on the tin, actually. These are goals that are, as long as I pass, I don't care. As long as I don't fail, I'm fine. As long as I get good grades, I'm okay. As long as I don't run out of time in the exam, I don't really care what happens. Avoidance goals are innately defensive and often come from a weaker sense of self-efficacy. I don't really deserve anything other than just getting through this experience alive. Whereas students who set approach goals and say, I really want 2 8s, 3 7s and 4 6, whatever it happens to be, they kind of put themselves on the hook setting those goals. But those goals then become tangible actions. whereas avoidance goals lead to just kind of a kind of building of the defences. As long as I pass, I don't care.
And how difficult is that? I don't know how much research you have and the experience of working from, away from, or to, and those kind of things. But is that based on experiences? Is that based on context? I'm thinking of probably generalising a lot, but those students in schools might be identified as underperforming. I don't think you have to then look at what underperforming is. But in terms of a lot of schools, and the system will then based on the 5 passes, but not passes, actually, getting something that can get them onto what we see as an appropriate next step as a society. There's a lot to unpick there, and we could probably spend hours and hours unpicking what that looks like. But do you see that actually there's a real correlation between those students who really, in terms of effort, trying to get them to be looking future thinking rather than thinking about they're just moving away from goals rather than if I'll just get through or just think else. Is that something that you see, and do these activities support both areas in terms of those those activities that staff and students can engage in? Do you find that it's as beneficial for both, or there's a challenge and a differentiation that needs to be made?
No, that's a really interesting point. Let's pick off that first bit first about approach versus avoidance, towards rather than away from. There's some lovely research that explores this idea of towards rather than away from. I'm thinking of, I think it's Andrew Martin's work, University of South Wales, 2015 perhaps, encourages 2 groups of mathematicians who are preparing for a test. One group have to set their own personal best goal. Now, a personal best goal is a do best goal is an approach goal. It includes an awareness of what happened last time. This is often why approach goals or performance goals work well, because students have to be engaged with where was I last time in order to set the personal best goal. So half were set this personal best goal and the other half weren't. And it was fascinating to see the impact the personal best goal had. What was it? I think it's a 7% gap between, and that's with no extra teaching and with no difference of approach, a 7% gap in student performance based just on the goal that they've set themselves. Because approach goals do mean you're on the hook, okay? I've said that I want 73 this time instead of 68. Where am I getting that extra 5% from? And then the goal becomes a series of strategies or behaviours, small steps forward. Now, as to the second half of your question, Steve, which is a really interesting one, is there a kind of differentiation element to it? It's interesting because often students are at different stages in their development psychologically and emotionally, and as a result, there is often a group who are early adopters. So as we deliver some of this, there might be a proportion of your tutor group or your class who are all over it. The top 10, 15% early adopt, and they go, yeah, I'm going to give this a go. Then there's a group in the middle who are waiting for further evidence. Let's see where Sir's going with this one. And then I might try and organise my week differently or revise differently or set myself a different kind of goal. And then there are students who are more reluctant to come with you. And that's sometimes because behaviour change is challenging, isn't it? It means I'm going to have to do things slightly differently. And so this is the challenge we face as teachers, isn't it? That not everyone moves in the same direction and the same speed at the same time. So there's a kind of bespoke nature to some of these activities. And we're asking perhaps staff to deliver a small number of them, but for one-to-one coaching conversations to be used to kind of support students with specific areas of development. Does that kind of answer your question, Steve?
It does. I'm just reluctant. The dog is absolutely kicking off downstairs. I think she's probably seen a mailman about 15 miles away or smelt him. So yeah, it did. It absolutely did. And I think it's one of those things of the research of actually the step into, even if it's just a mindset shift. I think the approach of how can we support these young people to have a variation in their goal from where their mindset they're currently at. But I think actually, I know that that it's full of activities and commitment and everything else. I think this is really key because how much in teacher training is supported away from actually goal setting and supporting students to change their mindset to focus on the positives and a change in tactic. Because education has been, especially the teacher training framework that's there at the minute, and the changes. It's been it's not been taken with kindness and positivity at all as changes at all. And I think that educators need to be supported and coached themselves to develop this better, because just teaching the subject only goes so far. And like you say, that whole thing of just pull your socks up. Just pull your socks up and just put a bit more effort in. We know you can be better. Does that student know they can be better? Yeah. Does that student know they can be better? I think it's quoted in your book.
Yeah.
That whole thing of just put more effort in. All right, but if this is the effort that they've always put in, what does that look like? If that's learned effort because of some of their environment that they've seen, how does one know how to do that? Because they've never learned it, and it's time to that coaching, that understanding of bringing that into the not into the curriculum, but into the whole cycle and process of and systems of how do we do it. I think is a beneficial one.
Yeah, and in the book, what I've tried to do is make explicit as possible precisely what you've just mentioned, Steve, and that is that, right, we're sitting with a student who perhaps isn't as engaged, who could be working harder, and our instruction to them is knuckle down, put a shift in, pull your socks up. When what we need to do actually is move to these are the habits and behaviours that typify students who are working harder than you. So let's take an example. We're working with a student whose engagement and levels of effort aren't where we want them to be. Option A, pull your socks up, put a shift in, work harder. Option B, we give them a concrete example of what hardworking students do differently. For example, we could say to them, have you ever thought of submitting a piece of homework 2 days early, checking with your teacher to say, how am I getting on with this, miss? Is this looking like it's heading in about the right direction? Getting some feedback and then returning to your desk and improving that piece and then handing it in on deadline day. Now, I've shared that with students before whose levels of effort are lower, and they have been amazed to find that their peers might be doing that. In fact, one student said to me, but sir, that's cheating. And I had to say, no, it isn't. That's a behavior associated with a higher level of engagement and effort. We can steal that behavior. That's not exclusive property that belongs to students from a certain socioeconomic background, or students whose mums and dads have been educated to a certain level, or students with older brothers and sisters who've got good GCSEs. That's one that we can all steal. Similarly, I've been working with a student recently and focusing on working without distractions. And again, that was a moment for that student. The conclusion we came to was this: social media is a drain on my time, sir. My levels of concentration are really poor. I work with my phone next to me. And so we had a very clear, we're going to work in 25-minute sprints. We're going to work dark. You're not going to be referring to your screen. You are going to get your social media hit every day, because our new rule is I check social media on public transport only. So we had this plan where I'm going to use the bus journey to and from school to catch up with everything that's happening, and then I'm going to work with my phone downstairs in the kitchen in short 25-minute bursts, and that is better than work harder or concentrate while you work. It's concrete, it's replicable, and it typifies those who tend to do better. And I think there's a kind of cultural component or socioeconomic component, which means some students seem to inherently know this and others don't.
I think there's a thing there that comes up in the book a lot, and obviously has come up in all the books, which is about how you don't, or you didn't use this. This isn't your phrase, but I know that it absolutely lies in there. Is that we don't rise to the level of our goals; we fall to the level of our systems, and so the principle of we can have all these big dreams in the world, and they're important, but actually, fundamentally, the net underneath that is a system that we have. So whether that is whether that is a set of 25-minute blocks, whether that is working in the dark, whether that is I have I've just taken on a new thing. So I've said this quite a lot, so forgive me if you're listening to this and you've heard me say it a lot recently, is that I was November 2023 I was diagnosed with ADHD. Most people go, how was it so late? But the reality is that one of my things around my attention challenges is distraction, and I find that difficulty to be able to switch between things. And so I've started, when I'm working, rather than listening to what I want to or put in other things, I just have lo-fi music, no lyrics, playing around in my and I'm not joking here, that my productivity has skyrocketed. Not just because I've gone to and it might be psychological, it might be psychosomatic, it could be, but reality is I know that if I put that lo-fi music on, I've got a chunk of time. I'm not going to check social media. I'm not going to be distracted by the 27 other tabs. I'm just on that. And I also, I'm a to-do list writer. I've always been a to-do list writer, and I know that there's arguments for and against to-do lists. But what I've started doing on my to-do list are I have 2 sets of to-do lists. So I have a list which is all the things that I need to do, and then there's a list of 5 things I'm going to guarantee I'm going to do today. And there is something in me that makes me, like, one of them things was I need to pack up one box today. That, even if that's a progress thing, right? It's like, I know that I've got to empty this office. I'm going to pack. I've got 20 boxes to fill. I'm going to pack a box today. If I've done 1 box, great. If I do 2, that's a win. But I wanted to do 1, and that's that list of 5. That lo-fi music, that ability to time box, and I have sessions. My diary is literally full of I know what I'm going to be doing when. Yeah. These are little systems, right? But I've learned these by trial. Nobody taught me this at 15 years old. I wish somebody had taught me this at 15 years old, because I've done all right. But I would like to think that things might have been a little bit different if somebody had shown me some systems.
Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? That we often assume with things, we've forgotten as adults how long it took us to get on top of this. And often, here's a phenomenon typical to school 6th forms, a kind of misguided but hopeful belief that the student will be different as a result of some magic that happens in the summer between year 11 and year 12. And so what you have is a significant raising of expectation for year 12, that with nothing that comes along with it in terms of teaching students how to organise their time or resources. And so, for example, I think a really interesting shift between Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 is the move from chronologically organised learning materials in exercise books to thematically or organised learning materials in modules and files. And I'm not sure we're as good as we need to be in supporting that move, for example, from chronology to theme. And so a lot of students cleave to old systems that make them feel that they try and scale up, that make them feel good about themselves. Thus, we come across students using exercise books for their A-level classes in an attempt to kind of mimic the sense of certainty and control they might have felt at GCSE. But I think you make a good point, Ben. I'm not sure we're explicit about our teaching of project management, time management, attention management. We just hope it develops.
It's almost like accidental, isn't it? Like you said, it's not been intentional. It's not been like explicit. Interestingly as well, that sits in there, you talk about that you're fascinated between the link between attitude and attention, which obviously ties into what I was talking about there in terms of attention. But like the attitude piece of, and you're right, I think you mentioned there about socioeconomic, that idea sometimes that they don't feel like they're ever going to be able to. I remember our first kid that went to Oxbridge. Now, Oxbridge isn't the only thing, right? It's not the only be-all. It wasn't the be-all and end-all. But from Accrington, the first young person from our 6th form that went to Oxbridge was a big deal. And the reason why it was a big deal was not because we had to get somebody to Oxbridge, even though, actually, I'm not going to lie to you, that did come as a directive from the governors. But I'll fall out with them for as long as I live about that. But I remember this young person going to Oxford. I remember going down with them for their interview. I remember preparing them for their task that they had to do. I remember those conversations that we had prior to that, and the biggest shift that I had to have with this young person was that you should be allowed to go. It wasn't like it wasn't that they weren't capable enough of going. It's that but nobody's been before from Accrington. My parents didn't get a degree, and like, why should I? Like, it's really sad, to be fair. But I imagine there's something in there about the attitude and thought process that also ties to attention and that ability to almost feel like worthy of achievement.
Absolutely. And what you've just said there, Ben, reminds me of a project we did around curiosity. And what we found working with certain students was an inherent and growing curiosity about subjects as they became really interested in them. Okay. And this would happen in year 10 and 11, and students would begin to think, wow, sociology, I think this might be my thing. I love this. Or I'm really enjoying English Lit, or history's really exciting. But there was no way of fueling or frameworking the further development of that feeling. First of all, there was a culture which encouraged you to suppress that feeling. Okay, I'm into history. What's wrong with me? No one else seems to be. This is strange. Maybe I'll deny it. So there was a kind of self-sabotage often with students full of potential who would deny their engagement or interest in something. But then secondly, there were not the circumstances that allowed students to find out what are the next steps for someone who is geekily into English Lit or psychology. What are the texts that they should have read? What are people going to roll their eyes at if you mention it as if it's the newest and most exciting thing ever? How do we stop our students who want to go to a conservatoire saying their favorite composer is Mozart? Because everyone's going to say that. We're going to need something above and beyond that. And so it's really interesting to think to ourselves as teachers, what pocket of our subject is covered by this curriculum? What's missing? And what kind of additional material could we encourage students to engage with as a result? I'll give you an example. I teach English Lit. Now, I'm going to use an example from a few years ago. So forgive me if it isn't current, but we had a situation where our English Lit curriculum at GCSE and A level didn't cover satire or humour at all. Okay. So that's a really interesting set of circumstances. We're going to create readers who reach the age of 18 who are familiar with, perhaps with tragedy or with the romantic poet or Victorian prose. But there's an entire, and it's going to be the same for other courses. Where are the gaps that we could kind of send them? No A-level curriculum or GCSE curriculum is encouraging students to read P.G. Wodehouse, but there's something really interesting about saying to a student, do you want to have a look at this humorous novel from the Golden Age, and we'll have a look at what you make of that? Or are you familiar with this element of chemistry or biology which isn't covered at GCSE, but which, if you were feeling geeky about it, you really need to know about? But that's interesting work to do with staff as well, because often staff are so focused on the delivery of the content specific to them that they've forgotten how they might support a student who wants to know more.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've had this conversation around reigniting the fire under the educators because of systemically we've forced them into focusing on an endpoint, unfortunately, and ultimately they have to get this in, they have to follow a scheme, and each week, even if something could go off on a tangent, Ben, I think you gave an example of a missed opportunity in class because you were so rigid and you've been observed because you had to go through all that process, and then the next week you're delivering something else and something else and something else. Those opportunities to delve into something beyond that set curriculum I think is missed, and maybe in the years gone by, it's been used as a stick against people during observation, where they've said you've deviated away from there, and actually, that's not what you should have been covering. There's some people have done it, and I think that's something where we have to get that back to educators to then say, find your passion again of why you're delivering the subject, and the way that you are passionate about it is to then be passionate to others. And that doesn't mean you have to cover it if there isn't enough time to cover it, but just supporting that other person to say, I know that you've got that interest in VESPA. Here's an example of what you could do. I can only support you a little bit on this because I am restricted. I really apologize. Being honest about that, and then saying, find it and come back to me, because if you're passionate about it, I'll stay 10 minutes next week and let's have a conversation. If you've taken the effort to explore it yourself, that's the bit where actually, I think we get back to that phase, and that's a space.
Yeah, I agree, Steve, because I think this, because it unequally, it disadvantages students unequally. If we're going to say, we haven't got time to cover that, we're going to have a group who might have the tools, characteristics and support to actually explore that further. And then we've got a group who might feel equally as fascinated by, what was that thing that Sir mentioned? But they haven't got the capacity, tools or strategies to figure it out. And often, you'll talk to teachers and they say, well, I do that for my students. I tell them a documentary to watch or a book chapter to read. But I don't think it's consistent. I don't think it's clear. And I don't think it's really doable for students. So often we also have this inconsistency in terms of delivery from staff, so that perhaps only a small proportion of students get that message. And I'd be pretty confident in saying it disadvantages the wrong students to approach it that way. So we need some kind of greater consistency and frameworking of those positive attitudes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a systemic conversation. It's individual conversations. It's about, we can do it at all levels, right? So we can do it. Yes, we know that we need some shifts to allow for flexibility to focus on some of this. Like I said, we put it into our tutorial program because we thought that it was a really good way to embed this as a regular habit. We had a group of, I was very fortunate, I had a group of older students who were keen to mentor younger students in this space, and I had a team of staff and tutors who, in fact, I had 2 non-teaching members of staff who would develop this mindset and support young people in developing this mindset. I was very fortunate in that. I know that. So yeah, it is individuals, it is systemic, and it's also, the one thing I wanted just to kind of touch on before we do our quickfire questions as a close was about the role of parents in this space, because obviously from a motivation, in some households, parents are an extrinsic motivation to say, you can do it, we believe what you can do, whatever you want to do, we'll support you, we'll take you to open evenings, we'll take you out and build cultural capital with you, and we'll do all those things with you. And then to the furthest extreme, where it's a pressure that you will be a doctor, you will be a lawyer, you will be a journalist, you will go in the army, you will. And then on the other side, you've got a whole host of, like, you're from Aki. Why do you want to go away somewhere else to university?
Yeah.
Like, remember that we used to work in that factory. What's wrong with you working in that factory? Like that whole conversation. And it's and like I said, nothing wrong with any of these, but the parental mindset has probably got an influence in there. What have you seen that's maybe working in that space?
That's really interesting point. The people like us do things like this model is a difficult one to escape, isn't it? If you're told these are the parameters within which we work. What's most useful, I think, is vivid and visual examples of peers who have done something similar. So I think the best examples I've seen are schools that create a catalogue, a vivid, visual and engaging catalogue of previous students who have done things. Now, so you might be listening, thinking, Martin, you're talking about alumni programs. We all know about alumni programs, but I think there's scope for significant development of alumni programs in schools. So here's an example. a lot of alumni programs focus on product, on academic outcome. Let's take photographs of the students who ended up at Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, St Andrews, LSE, or whatever it happens to be, and we'll have them up in the corridor. But what we don't have are alumni programs for students who I've been calling them innovation alumni, students who've done something unusual for the first time, students who've engaged with a particular challenge, students who've entered a competition, students who've got a part-time job as a football writer for a local team and are now doing match reports and are heading towards sports journalism as a result, or students who've taken some brave initial action and ended up being involved in a local charity. What we haven't got in schools often is the pathway to those kind of behaviours. So I think the scope for our alumni programs to be much more inclusive than they are, so that we're not saying, let's all have a look at a picture of Ben, who's gone to Newcastle to do medicine, and we'll have a quick read of what Ben did while he was here with us. And instead we've got, here's how one of our students ended up working at the BBC in Salford, because they went in and asked whether there were any opportunities, and they got an email address, and then they got in touch with someone who ended up coming back to them. There's often a series of disappointments in these steps before students achieve them. And then students will look at their peers and say, well, that happened to Lucas. It couldn't happen to me. What I think is important is that we track the pathways taken by innovators, regardless of whether they end up at a university that we might consider to be prestigious or not. They've done something brave, creative, difficult, and we've interviewed them and clarified precisely how that happened. That's been really useful when working with students as well, so that they can see that it isn't fate pointing its finger at you one day. You're not waiting to be picked. That's the important thing. Instead, there's this bias towards action. There's these possibilities, these potential routes that we can take. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And that idea around agency and allowing people to have that is exactly what we're talking about there, isn't it? We always finish our podcast with three quick, I say always, we've been doing it for about 9 months now, so now it's always. If you with three quickfire questions, so I'll ask one, Steve will ask one, then I'll finish up.
Okay.
So the first one is, if you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
What a question. I have to say this without any preparation. Oh my gosh. If I could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be? At the moment, I'm going straight down the line. I'm going obvious. Recruiting and retaining the very best teachers we can is a significant problem. I would absolutely love to sit down with somebody and talk about how we might engage, recruit, retain the next generation of teachers. There are some schools I visit where the average age of the staff makes me feel, I'm 53 as I speak now, it just makes me feel, oh my gosh, everybody's 28. And then there are others with significantly different challenges in terms of geography or in terms of context or culture, where you think we could do with another 10 28-year-olds on this team, couldn't we? That'd really get people fired up. Ben, you mentioned your 13-year-old daughter earlier. My daughter is also 13. Oh, the difference a good teacher makes. To see it from a parent's perspective is very different, isn't it? For mine,
Yep.
Thursday is a phenomenal day, not because she's studying a particular course, but because she's seeing a certain person deliver that course. And that's phenomenal to think, isn't it? I don't think I was quite aware of that in the way that I have been made aware of that over the last couple of years. That wasn't very quick fire. Sorry, Steve, I'll be quicker with you.
It's okay. What's the most exciting educational trend you're seeing emerging?
Wow, that's a really good one. I like anything which demystifies processes for classroom teachers. So I love this move towards, here are a very clear set of habits and behaviors which are instantly going to make you more effective in the classroom, instead of, well, it's an art more than a science. You've either got it or you haven't. It's all about, it's a cult of personality, and I'm afraid you don't quite measure up. I really like demystification and moving and breaking down barriers about guild knowledge. Only the very best know this, and instead making any kind of CPD that is really open and supportive that way. I've seen a lot of it. Yeah, really good stuff.
Love it. And final one is, who's your biggest inspiration in education?
Who's my biggest inspiration in education? Well, there are lots. I do a lot of reading in this area. So I'm going to choose, at the moment, I'm going to choose Cal Newport, Professor Cal Newport, Georgetown, computer science. But also, I think, and for those of you who aren't watching, Ben Whitaker is holding up a copy of Deep Work as we speak. And I bet, Ben, given that what you were saying earlier, Deep Work's probably had a pretty significant impact on your levels of productivity.
Yep.
His work really inspires me. And if I could make one other recommendation, it's So Good They Can't Ignore You, which is about career capital and busting the passion myth. That's another terrific read that I think's good for students who are in their late teens.
Love it. Well, we are big fans of the work that you're doing, Martin, and we're grateful that we got to review the VESPA handbook, which is the latest in the series. And if you haven't got that already, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Give that a read. We think there's a lot in there. In fact, it's a treasure trove. We've just kind of touched the surface on that. So thanks for what you've shared there. Thanks for what you are doing in terms of like thinking around. These are practical things rather than just ethereal concepts. These are practical things that we can make happen. So once again, thanks, Martin, for joining us on the podcast. And if you haven't already signed up for the EduFuturist Uprising, if you're listening now or you're watching, then click the link in the show notes. You can come and join us in Manchester in June 2025. And actually, we're going to be announcing very, very soon some of our partners and some of the awards that are going to be available for you to be nominated for. So watch this space on that. Thanks, Martin. And thanks, everybody, for listening and watching another episode of the EduFuturist podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Steve. Been a real pleasure.
Cheers, Martin.